Okay, so the next thing we're going to start looking at is the Aircraft Maintenance Manual, or AMM. We're going to use the one for the Piper PA-32, which is known as a Saratoga 2. That's the one I had up earlier. So that is on, again, Lab 8 Maintenance Publications. We've got the manual there. I'll bring up my copy of it as open here as well. I'm just going to separate these real quick so we can bounce back and forth. Pop that over here. And so, here we need to start looking at some various items. So not everything may be where it should be or where you think it is, okay? So where do you think something like a replacement interval is going to be? Where do you think you would go for something like this? Yes. Anything in your ATA codes that maybe falls into that category? 05. 05. Why 05? Why 05? Time limit. So let's start looking at section 5. So you can see here 5 time limits, maintenance checks, and specifically chapter 510 is our time limits. Okay. So if I bring this over, I'm going to bump it down to where we can see the full page here. One way is to kind of go through until I find chapter 5, and then there'll be an index here as well, or a table of contents, for chapter 5. So you can see we have a chapter 5 table of contents, which gets more detailed. So we've got general, time limit, scheduled maintenance. And then it lists not just the section. Some manuals then go in and have this third column would be your subsection. So instead of 510.00, there might be 510.01, 510.10, 510.20, which kind of gives you those subsections. The smaller aircraft, usually they don't go as far, but then the other part it has is the page number. And you can see the page numbers start over in each section. So there's only one page in 510.00 time limits. So if we skip ahead to, 510.00 here is general information. And that's another thing I just want to point out. In each chapter, the first one, like here, 50000, is always going to be some kind of a general information chapter. It'll say general information, description, and operation. That's a great place to check. Like if it's your first time working on a system, or if you're trying to troubleshoot a system and want to know how it should operate normally, that 00 section is a good one to read just to get a general overview of how it should be going. But for our time limits, we're going to go to 510.00. Okay, now this actually tells us to go somewhere else. So time limits, it says refer to 4-00 for the FAA approved airworthiness limitation sections. It sets forth each mandatory replacement time, structural inspection interval, and related structural inspection. So that's one option. Then you've got 520 is Piper's recommended inspection program. And then there's also inspections required by flight hour calendar year. They're included as part of the annual or 100-hour inspection, or if you put it under a progressive inspection program, it'll be included under a progressive inspection. So they really don't have a lot here other than telling you to go somewhere else. So we have a statement that is, what is the replacement interval for the standby alternator? Where do you think that might be? Which one of these would that fall under? So a replacement interval, is that like a airworthiness limitations, set replacement time? Is it recommended? Or which one do you think? Where do you think we want to go to actually see that part? Any ideas? So to give you a key, it has what is the replacement interval? In our question, it actually says replacement interval here. So do any of these use a specific kind of replacement interval or replacement? 4. So replacement time right here. So or structural inspection interval related structural inspection procedure. So let's go to 400. So I'm going to zoom back out on here, and we're going to go up to 4. There's the beginning of 4. It has our list of affected pages and revisions, our airworthiness limitations, okay, our table of contents, and now we get into limitations. So it says no limitations related to fatigue life of the airplane, life limited parts. So life limited parts, it talks about you have to replace them. You have to follow Piper's recommended inspection program, okay? So anything there? Uh-oh. So that didn't tell us, right? You don't see anything about a standby alternator here, do we? So this can be the frustrating part, is sometimes it's a bit of a scavenger hunt. So let's go back to 5. And what else did it say? So 520 for recommended inspection. Inspections by flight hour calendar years include a progressive inspection are listed individually in 530. So, sometimes it can be a bit of a back and forth trying to find something. The kind of catch-all hint, the nice part with most of our newer maintenance manuals is that they are text and they're searchable. And in all honesty, the easiest way to find something like this is typically just to search for it. So if I search for the standby alternator, I must have standby alternator. You can see there's 80 matches, but it's going to be pretty early on. So the first part is it's going to hit the index pretty hard. But then you can see it actually ends up being in our, in our scheduled maintenance. So it brings us to the next spot it's actually mentioned is in Chapter 5 under engine group. So these are the kind of inspections, scheduled inspections for the Saratoga. Okay. And under the engine group, it has a section about if installed, inspect the standby alternator per 100-hour standby alternator inspection. Okay. But it doesn't actually tell us, that's an inspection. If we find where it tells us to change it, so we have kind of in Chapter 5, we have kind of our special inspection. So items that don't fall under 100-hour or annual. Let me show you that in the index here. So if I go in the manual here, 530, you can see a special inspections right here. And so special inspections, this actually falls under per flight hour. Okay, 530.00, page number 1. So if I go back to that page 530.00, which we found basically by searching, and then 530.00, page 1. Okay. If I increase this, so if installed, we have to, each 1,700 hours, or at engine overhaul, whichever comes first, we have to replace the standby alternator with a newer overhauled unit. So, for something like that, 1,700 hours or engine overhaul. Okay. So, things like that can take a little bit of back and forth, right? So we have different tools available. We have those different indexes. We have kind of what makes the most sense, although they don't always put things in the spot where it makes the most sense. And then if all else fails, we have the ability to search in most of our manuals. When I post manuals, even if they're paper copies, I try to scan them and then I run OCR on them, which isn't perfect. Optical character recognition isn't perfect, but it makes most of them searchable, at least to a level where it's functional for what we're doing. When you go any kind of shop that, everything now is going to cloud-based. And so, it is all searchable. There's links in it that link between diagrams and images and stuff. And so, they become a lot more user-friendly than some of the old manuals. And if you haven't seen them before, let me just show you what an old manual looks like. That I always pick on the 182. So the Cessna 182, for instance, that we have, has some of the oldest manuals that we own. And actually, the 182 or the 172? I might be mistaken on which one it is. Yeah, it's the 182. So here you can see the table of contents. Rather than being an ATA code, they just call them sections. And they don't even follow like ATA breakup. So there's section 1 is general, section 2 ground handling service, cleaning, they throw all kinds of stuff in there. So it can be a little fun trying to find specific things because there's only like 20 sections. And yeah, they're not laid out the easiest. And this one, I think I have run character recognition on it, but it, when you start looking into it, you can see it's a pretty, it's obviously a scan of a paper document that we have. It's kind of fuzzy. It's probably a copy of a copy of a copy at some point. So, if you're dealing with older aircraft or that kind of thing, you get the fun task of doing that. So fortunately, most of our new stuff is going to be looking more like this. Makes it a lot easier, okay? Next one is like, what engine is installed on this? There's a couple ways we can find that. So, so how have we looked at what engine would go on an aircraft so far? What do we know at this point? Okay, so we've looked at the logbooks, okay? What if we want to see what was certified to be on the aircraft? What have we looked at so far? There's something we've pulled from the dynamic regulatory system that tells us the type certificate data sheet, the TCDS, right? But another way we can do this is it's typically contained in the manual as well. And so if you look at the, in our Piper manual here, in the kind of general information section, it'll actually talk about what type of engine is supposed to be on the aircraft. So if I go to that, where was it on this one? I went through this last night and I'm still drawing a blank. There we go. If we go into kind of the introduction, why am I drawing a blank right now? I actually pause for a minute. So if you go in the introduction, it does show engine vendor, and it tells you they do it by a part number. Okay, which kind of it lists the different series and that kind of thing. But this one in particular is the IO 540 K1, or AH1A, because we're looking at the turbocharged version. We're in a 301T. And so it's the TIO 540 AH1A. If you have the non-turbocharged, if it's just the straight up 301, then it's the IO 540 K1 G5, because remember that T on the beginning is your turbocharge. And then there is also, this was a section when you go into the if you go down to power plant in the description and operation, so 7100, it will tell you in here as well what the it'll tell you what it is. So if it's the Saratoga 2 HP, which is the non-turbocharged, or the Saratoga 2 turbocharged, so ours being the Saratoga 2 turbocharged, it shows the airplane's powered by a 300 horsepower Lycoming engine, TIO 540 AH1A. And then it goes on to tell you what is all, what's all furnished on there, what type of exhaust manifolds it has, alternate air, kind of some basic information. So that's that 71, that 0000 chapter where the description and operation comes in handy. If you're trying to get, a high level overview, but not necessarily the specifics on a component, that's where you want to go through. So I'm going to go ahead and have you kind of start working through the manual a little bit to answer the rest of the questions.